The sky turned this weird reddish color, like someone had bruised it as the sun sank below the horizon. At first, the flashes looked far away, thin streaks of red, kind of like a flare was going off way up in the atmosphere. "Maybe someone's sending signals to Mars," Mike said with this goofy grin while hammering the last peg into his tent. We all cracked up. Our laughter felt light and easy, echoing through the trees, almost teasing the heavy quiet beyond the campsite. There were 5 tents, 5 camp chairs awkwardly strapped to our backpacks. We'd been friends since middle school, too many afternoons and stupid pranks to count. This trip was our way of celebrating, a goodbye to high school and a sort of leap into whatever was coming next. But even after the red flashes faded and the sky turned a dull blue, I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like a shiver in the back of my mind. Mike was the first to finish setting up. He brushed his hands off on his jeans and gave us that crooked grin of his. "I'll grab some firewood," he said, already heading into the trees. I watched him disappear into the shadows and thought about those late nights we spent at the gas station last summer. We'd been stuck on graveyard shifts together, cracking terrible jokes to stay awake. Josh, meanwhile, was doing his thing, fiddling. This time, it was with his tent manual. His glasses kept catching the last bits of light, and he muttered to himself, flipping pages back and forth like they might magically explain something different. He wasn't exactly my closest friend, but I remembered that one time in math class when I totally copied his homework. Rose and Ivy, though, were like a package deal. My cousin Ivy was kneeling next to Rose, and the two of them were piecing together their tent like it was a puzzle they'd already done 1,000,000 times. Each of them, every one of us, was clear in my head, like snapshots from a photo album. That's why I noticed it. There were 5 of us. I was sure of it. When Mike came back, it was pretty much dark. We'd set up the camp chairs around the fire pit, their skinny legs sinking a little into the soft dirt. The forest around us felt smaller now, like the trees were creeping closer as the shadows deepened. The air had turned icy, sharp against my skin, and the wind, just a soft whisper before, started cutting through my jacket like it wanted to pull me apart. "Seriously? You guys couldn't save me a seat?" Mike grumbled as he dropped the firewood in the middle of the circle. That's when it hit me. My stomach clenched tight, like when you remember something you forgot but can't quite figure out what it was. I looked at the chairs, 5 of them, all full. Mike hadn't sat down yet. I opened my mouth to say something, but my voice barely broke through the wind. Wait. No one spoke, but I saw it, the tension in their faces. Josh was wringing his hands, his eyes darting between us like he was looking for an answer. Rose looked pale and stiff, her mouth pressed into this tight, thin line. Ivy sat completely still, her hands clamped onto her jacket so hard her knuckles turned white. I counted again. First the chairs, then the faces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each one familiar. Each one off. Except for, "It's fine," Mike said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence with an awkward laugh. "I'll grab another chair." His eyes met mine as he stood, and for a second, I saw something there. Something hard to pin down. Was it a question? A warning? "I'll come with you," I said quickly, too quickly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, and before anyone could argue, I was already up and following him. We walked past the tents, the firelight fading behind us as we stepped into the edge of the forest. It was colder here, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones. My breath puffed out in little clouds as we moved farther from camp. "How many of us are here?" I whispered. The words felt strange in my mouth, like they didn't belong to me. Mike didn't answer right away. He stopped walking, staring back toward the camp. His forehead creased and he muttered, "There's 5 of us, right?" His voice wavered, like he wasn't sure if he was saying it or asking it. 5 chairs, I said automatically, but saying it didn't make it feel true. The thought dragged through my mind like it was fighting to stay buried. "Yeah, 5, Mike repeated, but it sounded hollow, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. Around us, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The rustling leaves, the hum of insects, everything was gone. No wind, no sounds. Just this thick, suffocating silence. It pressed down on us, heavy and endless. The question lingered in the air between us, unanswered. "How many of us are there?" Mike cleared his throat, his voice small. "Yeah, that's right," he said, turning back toward the fire like it didn't matter. But I could tell it did. When we got back, 2 chairs were empty, ours. It made sense now. Somehow, seeing that helped the unease fade just a little, but the tension in the air still clung to us, heavy like smoke. Ivy was the first to break the silence, saying we were probably just tired. It sounded reasonable enough. The hike had been rough, and we'd been up since dawn. Rose nodded, ever the one to smooth things over, and cracked open a 6-pack. We each grabbed a can, and by the time the last one was empty, it felt like we could finally relax. We pulled our chairs closer to the fire, the flames lighting up our faces. The heat felt good, but not enough to chase away the lingering chill in my chest. Rose started telling one of her creepy stories, something about being alone in her house and hearing weird noises. I tried to pay attention, but this shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Wait." The word spilled out of my mouth before I could stop it, cutting Rose off. "Who started the fire?" The group froze, all eyes on me. At first, they looked annoyed, but then confusion started to creep in. Nobody said anything. "Wasn't it you, Mike?" Josh asked, his voice uncertain. Mike shook his head, his brow furrowed. Ivy's gaze snapped to me, her face pale. Her lips trembled as she said, "I think the person standing behind Luna did it." My heart stopped. I whipped around so fast it hurt, every muscle in my body screaming to move. But there was nothing there. Just the forest, dark and endless. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me, sharp and unshakable. I don't know why I said that," Ivy stammered, her hands trembling. Rose scooted closer to her, gripping her shoulders and murmuring soft reassurances. None of us believed them. "We need to leave," Rose said finally, her voice tight. "Yeah, something's wrong," Mike agreed, his eyes darting toward the woods like he expected something to step out of the shadows. "But it's pitch black out there," Josh said, his voice tense. "We'll get lost." He was right. The forest was a maze at night, the trails we'd followed earlier completely swallowed by the darkness. The idea of staying felt suffocating, but going out there? That was worse. "We shouldn't sleep in separate tents," Ivy suggested, her voice shaking. "We should stay together." Everyone nodded. The thought of being alone was unbearable. We paired up, me with Mike, like always, and Ivy with Rose. Josh hesitated, glancing around, and said, "Wait, who am I supposed to pair with?" Nobody answered. The silence that followed was suffocating. That's when it hit all of us. The same thought, the same cold, creeping realization. We almost left Josh alone. We almost didn't notice. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. The group went still, every face pale in the flickering light. I tried to count us again, mentally running through each name, but my thoughts broke apart every time I got close. My stomach flipped, and I doubled over, gagging into the dirt. My head pounded like my brain was fighting itself, like it couldn't or wouldn't accept what was happening. "Let's just stay close," Ivy said quietly, her voice unsteady but somehow calm. She had an idea. Rearrange the tents so they all faced each other in a U-shape. "It'll make us feel safer," she added, though I wasn't sure if she was trying to convince us or herself. Mike stayed by my side while the others worked, his hand gripping mine. The contact felt real, solid, like an anchor keeping me from slipping too far into panic. The others shuffled around us, dragging tents into place, the sound of zippers and rustling nylon filling the air. Finally, we all stepped back to look. It felt a little better, almost. We counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was always 5. Josh tried to sound confident when he said he'd sleep alone, but his voice shook just enough for me to notice. I wanted to argue, to insist we pair off like before, but no one else said anything. I stayed quiet, hating myself a little for it. It felt wrong, but we convinced ourselves it was fine. Everything would be fine. We agreed to leave as soon as the sun came up, then crawled into the tents. Mike and I shared one, as usual. Inside, it was cramped. The smell of the nylon strong and comforting in a weird way. I stretched out in my sleeping bag, staring through the half-open zipper at the clearing. The fire was out now, just a dark smudge in the middle of the circle of tents. Moonlight glinted faintly off the dew-covered grass. Beyond that was the forest, black and endless. Something made me glance toward the 2 extra tents we hadn't taken down. My breath caught. Someone was standing next to them, perfectly still. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might wake Mike. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was nothing, just a trick of the shadows, or my imagination running wild. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. It didn't matter. I told myself it didn't matter. Exhaustion finally dragged me under, pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. The scream jolted me awake. Rose's scream. Mike and I fumbled with the zipper, our hands shaking as we tugged it open. The cold air hit me like a slap as we crawled out into the clearing. Ivy and Rose were standing near Josh's tent, their faces pale and frozen in horror. "What's wrong?" Mike asked, his voice tight. Neither of them answered. They just stared, their eyes fixed on the tent in front of them. My stomach knotted as we moved closer. The sight inside made my knees buckle. Josh's sleeping bag was twisted, knotted into itself like a snake choking its prey. His body was still inside, contorted in ways that didn't make sense. Blood soaked through the fabric, thick and dark, pooling underneath him. His face, what I could see of it, was frozen in a horrible, silent scream. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. And somewhere, out in the darkness, something was watching us. Mike zipped the tent shut without a word, his jaw clenched tight. Ivy was sobbing uncontrollably, shaking Rose like she could snap her out of that blank, glassy stare. It wasn't working. "Get up! Run!" Mike's shout jolted us like a slap, breaking the frozen panic holding us all. We didn't think. We didn't grab anything. We just ran. The only light was the weak beam from Mike's trembling flashlight. The trail twisted and turned like a nightmare maze, the trees crowding in so close that even the moon couldn't find us. Then Rose screamed. I turned just in time to see her trip, collapsing hard onto the dirt. She clutched her ankle, her face twisted in pain. Someone muttered something about a splint, their voice shaky but trying to stay calm. And then it happened. Rose was gone. A blur of motion yanked her into the woods, her body disappearing so fast it didn't seem real. Her scream sliced through the air, high and raw, before cutting off like it had been swallowed whole. "Rose!" Ivy's shriek cut through the chaos. Before Mike could stop her, she bolted into the woods. "Ivy, no!" he yelled, grabbing at her, but she ripped free. "Come back!" I didn't think. "Ivy!" I shouted, stumbling forward. But Mike's hands caught my shoulders, his grip iron tight and desperate. "Luna!" he rasped, his voice shaking. "We can't! We have to go. Now!" I froze, torn between guilt and terror, until the silence hit me. The silence where Ivy's voice should have been. My chest felt like it was caving in. Mike yanked me forward and we ran. The flashlight's beam bounced wildly, barely lighting the twisting path in front of us. My breaths were ragged, my legs screaming, but I couldn't stop. I didn't dare stop. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, right behind us. "Mike!" I choked, the words catching in my throat. "Someone's following us!" He glanced at me, his face shifting from confusion to fear, then to something hard, determined. "Keep running," he said, his voice low but firm. He shoved the car keys into my hand, and I felt the cold press of his pocket knife as he pulled it free from his pants. "Mike, don't... Go!" he barked, turning on his heel. "No." I tried to grab him, but he shoved me forward. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Run, Luna!" Tears blurred my vision, and my hands clenched the keys so tightly they bit into my palm. I ran, the sound of his struggle fading behind me. Grunts, impacts, and then nothing. The trail was a blur. My knees buckled more than once, sharp rocks tearing at my skin as I fell, but I clawed my way back up each time. My lungs burned. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might stop. Then I saw it. The parking lot. The car sat there like a lifeline, the only thing in the world that felt real. I tripped toward it, fumbling with the keys as my hands shook so badly I almost dropped them. Somehow, I got the door open, slid into the seat, and turned the ignition. The engine roared, gravel spraying as I floored it out of the lot and onto the empty highway. The trees blurred past, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Adrenaline bled into dread, hollow and gnawing, as the highway stretched on endlessly. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my breathing shallow and shaky. I kept my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. Something shifted, so slight I almost didn't notice it. The faintest creak of weight settling in the back seat. I didn't dare turn around. The car's engine growled louder as I pushed it faster, tearing through the morning light like it could save me. When the neon glow of a gas station sign finally flickered on the horizon, I swerved into the lot too fast, tires screeching against the pavement. I stumbled out of the car, my legs shaking, and ran inside without looking back. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, their hum somehow louder than the silence that pressed around me. My hands shook as I fumbled with the phone, dialing 911. "Help!" I stammered, my words spilling out in a rush. "There's something in the woods. It got my friends. I don't... Please, just send someone." The operator's voice was calm, too calm. "Stay where you are," they said, their tone steady like they'd heard it all before. "We'll send someone to you." I nodded even though they couldn't see me. My breaths were shallow, my heart pounding. But for a moment, just a moment, it felt like I was okay. Like help was actually on the way. Then I heard it. A sound, low and guttural, like a growl but deeper. It vibrated through the floor, through my chest, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze, gripping the counter for balance as the glass doors rattled in their frames. Outside, something shifted. The trees in the distance swayed, not with the wind, but like they were breathing. The air shimmered, the parking lot bathed in a strange haze that blurred the edges of everything. It wasn't right. It wasn't natural. I couldn't see it. Whatever it was, it stayed hidden just beyond the tree line. But I felt it. Something enormous. Something alive. The feeling wasn't like looking at a creature. It was like the ground itself was alive, stretching and groaning under the weight of something too big, too wrong for this world. The lights flickered above me, their buzzing now frantic and stuttering. My vision blurred, the room tilting and warping as though I was underwater. For a split second, I thought I saw it. Something vast. Its shape impossible to describe. Its presence like a knot in my mind that refused to unravel. No, I whispered to myself, stumbling backward. I couldn't stay here. I turned and bolted for my car, shoving the door open so hard it slammed against the frame. The night outside felt heavier than before, the haze clinging to me like smoke. The car engine sputtered for a horrifying moment before roaring to life. My foot slammed on the gas, gravel spraying as I tore out of the lot and back onto the highway. The glow of the gas station disappeared behind me, swallowed by the shadows and that shimmering, pulsing fog. But it wasn't gone. Even as I sped down the empty road, my hands locked on the wheel. I could feel it. Out there, in the trees, in the spaces where light didn't reach. It wasn't chasing me, not yet. It didn't need to. It knew me now. And somehow, I knew it wasn't finished.